Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib, and I'm here with my co-host, JP. How are you, sir?
Great to be here. Happy to be here.
Amazing. And we are honored to have a great special guest with us today, Cathy Eason. Nice to see you, Cathy.
Nice to see you both as well. Pleasure to be here.
We are excited about today's topic because we want to talk about blood flow. Blood flow is something that we kind of take for granted. I honestly feel like the vasculature, the blood vessels, getting blood to places, making sure that nutrients get to where they need to go, something that in overall healthcare, we tend to take for granted. And then we realize that, stroke, high blood pressure, heart attacks, these are all vascular based issues that result and are probably the number one causes of death and morbidity in so many people's lives. And so blood flow is something that I think we shouldn't be taking for granted anymore. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to have this conversation. Another part was to talk about how do we make sure that blood flow is optimized? How do we ensure that people have great blood flow, ensuring that the blood vessels, their arteries, their capillaries, their veins are able to get blood from the heart to all of the other organs and back from the organs to the heart. And so that's where we're going to go with today's discussion and today's entire topic. So Cathy, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk a little bit about you first before we get into the topic overall. What brought you into this holistic health, wellness, vascular area to understand blood flow and nitric oxide as well as you do?
Yeah, thank you. The long story is that I was previously a body worker and an exercise physiology specialist. And I quickly realized that inflammation was not being treated from the outside in, that I had to start diving into the body. So for the last 20 years, in my role as a functional nutritionist and an educator of functional medicine and holistic health principles, I have just learned how much I love the physiology of the body and what it can do for us. So from a big picture clinical standpoint, every single person who I have ever worked with has had some sort of suboptimal blood flow issue. And that's just really apparent, whether we're talking about neuropathies and other metabolic effects from insulin resistance and diabetes, or whether we're talking about a digestive dysfunction, or perhaps we're talking about even just a skin health issue. I can make a case for the reason why blood flow should be considered. And you're so right. Nobody ever thinks about their blood flow. I'm now hyper acutely aware of blood flow because as the chief science officer at Berkeley Life, I'm studying nothing but nitric oxide. And it's really exciting to see where the research has come, even in just the last 20 years, and what we know about this really amazing signaling molecule that supports our blood flow.
I love it. I do want to talk about this molecule a little bit because there are different forms of nitric oxide, different types of isoforms of nitric oxide synthase, which is the enzyme that promotes it or produces it. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of nitric oxide, what its role is within the body and how we produce it where we need it and where it may be problematic when we get into maybe too much of it.
Sure. I think the beauty of, I come from a very root cause medicine nutrition approach. Food as medicine has always been my jam with my patients, but also use of nutraceuticals to help, reach therapeutic plateaus. And nitric oxide itself is something that when I first studied biochemistry, I'm afraid to admit how many decades ago that was, I didn't really think about it. I just learned the biochemistry and you moved on. But now we know with all this enhancement in research and advancement in research, that there are dozens and dozens of signaling mechanisms of this molecule in the body. So nitric oxide itself is a gas with a very short half-life of 2 to 3 milliseconds. But our body in its innate intelligence has at least two ways to make it, two ways that are well studied. The endogenous internal nitric oxide synthase pathway, where it's enzyme-driven, highly dependent on having the right genetic variations to make these enzymes work, highly dependent on precursor nutrients and things like that. But in nature's intelligence is what I like to call it. We also have a built-in secondary pathway, a complementary pathway that comes from diet. So the ingestion of dietary nitrates, which most of us can get on a daily basis, but a lot of people in this culture have stopped eating their vegetables. And so we lack that dietary nitrate concentration. Through that pathway, we have a more simplified It is still enzyme dependent, but it works in concert in synergy with the enzymes of our oral and intestinal microbiome to help us break down dietary nitrates to smaller and smaller components of nitrogen-based molecules that turn into NO to signal everything from vasodilations of our vasculature, relaxation of smooth muscle tissues all through the body, which has a role on digestion and metabolic function, signaling of the nervous system, signaling of the immune system, signaling of the endocrine system. There is really not a system in the body that's not impacted in some measure by the signaling that nitric oxide produces. And that really, I find it so foundational that I wish I would have started using nitric oxide support clinically about 20 years ago instead of about 6 years ago wholeheartedly.
That's fair. And we will always learn new things as we go in practice. And there's always new research coming out. So I appreciate where you are coming from. I wish I knew about the vagus nerve long before I started talking about it as much as I did. So I fully appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about this nitric oxide endogenous pathway that we generally rely on for the most part for most people that are dealing with, when we're younger, the system is working really well. And then slowly that system, these nitric oxide synthase enzymes, start to decouple and they start to be less functional. Let's talk about those enzymatic systems that we have internally.
Yeah, that gets us back to when things go problematic and perhaps we can have too much of a good thing, right? So yes, in our endothelial tissue, we have a range of enzymes called nitric oxide synthase. When they are based in the endothelial tissue and the vasculature, we consider them eNOS enzymes. They also work in the brain tissue and the nervous system tissue. We have neuronal NOS enzymes, and we also have what's known as inducible. This is probably what we see when people talk about elevations in nitric oxide that become problematic and possibly inflammatory, is there's an immune system challenge. The immune system responds. And as we can see in our culture today and in functional medicine, a lot of us work with autoimmune affected patients where the immune system is having an inappropriate response, attacking its own systems, hyperactive immune responses that are upregulated. This can happen with iNOS. We can see a significant elevation in nitric oxide. And remember, it's a gas. So most of us are not going to test it with a blood panel. That's reserved for laboratory research. We don't have that capability, but we can see through signs and symptomology and through simple salivary functional testing, we can see if nitric oxide has perhaps been elevated by an out of control immune response. I have been doing some research lately. I want to understand more about this crosstalk between the inducible nitric oxide from the enzyme-dependent pathway and the complementary pathway, the dietary nitrate reduction pathway, which in my view is a simple exchange of electrons through oxidative reductive reactions that is less dependent on having everything perfect to make it happen. Electrons want to seek their place in the body, in the physiology. That reactivity does still rely on enzymes. It relies on enzymes from bacterial communities that live within us. And so we are never going to be completely enzyme non-dependent to make nitric oxide. But what we know and what the research has been showing me is that there are studies, they're animal model studies, but they're very much targeted towards vascular health, blood flow, and whether or not these two pathways have any crosstalk. And the research is showing us that they do. The research shows us that the ingestion of dietary nitrates can attenuate that out of control, hyperactive, inducible NOS reaction that's happening. It does so by sort of mitigating both activated phosphorylation and inhibitory phosphorylation. So there's evidence in the literature, and I followed a researcher. I wrote her name down so I wouldn't forget, Karlstrom. She's been studying this for about 10 years to look for that, sort of how can we promote dietary nitrates as a cardiovascular benefit, especially when we already see so much vascular disease. And as you already mentioned, number one cause of death in men and women is cardiovascular disease. So it's really interesting to me that, again, in the body's innate natural intelligence has a way to help us slow down a hyperactive reaction with the ingestion of nitrates that follow this complementary pathway. So there's not so much pressure on the enzyme-dependent pathway And there's more pressure on the human to eat as they should and to ingest the foods they should. And I'm seeing this play out clinically in my own autoimmune clientele. So you might consider that somebody with an out of control autoimmune response, let's just say it's a patient with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, there is an inflammatory response. The autoimmune response is generated and they're into a flare up. They're, fatigued. We see, endocrine imbalances. We see heart palpitations. We see blood pressure dropping. All of that I have witnessed as my patients go into a flare, usually because they've sort of slipped off the protocol. They go to the birthday party and they eat the piece of cake. They have the sugar, they have the gluten, the dairy, whatever it is that we have tried to eliminate from their diet in an effort to quench that inflammatory response. This is human life, right? We all make those choices. So they make a choice, they start into a flare. And I witnessed the ability of dietary nitrates to calm that flare simply by opening blood flow, allowing better perfusion of tissues with anti-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines, allowing a little more help on the way, if you will, to that immune response to calm it and stop them from being in a flare. Now, I don't have this written up as a published research. This is clinical testimonials that I'm talking about, but I've witnessed it over and over and over.
So the plural of anecdote in this case is maybe not evidence, but it's certainly convincing. Let me ask a couple of questions about vasodilation in general. So, we know that vasoconstriction, especially chronically, can lead to peripheral nerve damage, et cetera. So we know that too much vasoconstriction is dangerous. But vasodilation can be both a positive and a negative. And as you mentioned, during inflammation, there's a significant amount of vasodilation that is induced so that monocytes and fluid can go from the vasculature into the tissue that's injured and flood it with bloodborne cytokines and chemokines, as you mentioned, et cetera, and even new cells extravasating into the tissue. In the context of migraine headaches, it has been established, or is widely believed at least, that one of the mechanisms by which headaches occur is you get this dramatic vasodilation, possibly as a consequence of inflammation, triggered by a compound or a chemical called CGRP, calcitonin gene-related peptide. It's a potent vasodilator. And we know that people who suffer with migraines, when they have or they're given nitroglycerin tablets or other what are referred to as NO donors, nitric oxide donors, that can trigger migraines because it's triggering that vasodilation. How do we balance, and maybe it's a function of some of the dietary things that can trigger more NO, and we know that they're dietary triggers of migraine. How do we square the world of nitric oxide with migraine and headache? Do you have some insights for us on that?
Well, my first thought is that when individuals are using those nitric oxide donors, as you call them, from nitroglycerin, those are organic nitrates. Dietary nitrates are known as inorganic nitrates, and there is evidence in physiology science that they are assimilated and utilized a little bit differently in the body. I would have to go dig into my research to pull some studies for you. I'm happy to do that later, but I've been diving into that a little bit, where we see this attenuation again of that hyperinflammatory response. Would I want my patient really upping their dietary nitrates while they're taking an organic nitrate like nitroglycerin? Probably not. And what I would do clinically is I'd be using a salivary test strip that's very non-invasive, my patient can do at home, to determine if their salivary nitrite levels, which are clinically correlated to serum and salivary nitrate and nitrite, I'd be looking to see if their levels are elevating as a response. I wouldn't want them to be doing that together. We also know migraines to me are tricky as a treatment option. And again, I'm not a prescribing physician, so I use functional medicine, nutrition-based protocols. But what I found is that we have to look again for the root cause source. And so is there an underlying hormonal trigger? Is there an underlying toxicity that would need to be removed from the body? Is there a low-level immune response, some kind of low-level viral load or bacterial load that might be the cause of it? So in my functional medicine brain, I'm walking backwards from that, but I still might be thinking about opening blood flow. And one thing we know about boosting dietary nitrates to enhance nitric oxide function is that it and also contributes to both inhibition and pro-signaling of those constrictive and vasodilating proteins. I'm going to have to do more research on the protein you just shared with me to have a more firm response on that. But what I can tell you is that all the literature is showing that nitric oxide is not selective for just vasodilation. It's there to trigger vasodilation, which has a secondary effect of triggering a constrictive factor. We also know that
regulatory. It's really regulatory as opposed to just...
very regulatory is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Yeah. And then we also know that nitric oxide in the body signals angiogenesis. And so part of that enhanced vasodilation for a patient with a migraine that might be too much is they're simply getting better blood flow because they're having the opening of new, smaller vasculature. At the same time, this might be highly beneficial for somebody with a peripheral neuropathy. So I think with migraines, it becomes a very individualized message and really looking for some of those key factors. I tend to be, we all work from our personal experience, and I'm a mold toxicity sufferer. So my brain goes to, let's root out the mold and let's root out the inflammatory response. But that's not everybody. But, it's clinically, that's where we go when that's our experience and the people we've worked with. So I'd be looking for those other hidden triggers in migraine medicine for sure.
Yeah, very root cause focused, trying to figure out what triggered the inflammatory reaction in the first place. And so I just want to talk about something here because I think this is an important point. We mentioned this regulatory capacity of NO, right? That it's meant to provide the tool in a very short burst to support that vasodilation to occur in combination with then initiating the vasoconstriction. So it's this idea of the pulsing of what I like to call the pulsing of life, right? We have vasoconstriction and vasodilation occurring in a rhythmic fashion, the rhythm of life. This is the same rhythm that's initiated by smooth muscle relaxation in the gut, allowing for food to move through in a peristaltic fashion. Obviously not at the same rate, not at the same scale, but very similar conceptually in terms of being able to push the food along the gut in the optimal fashion. And then with regards to migrating motor complex, same idea. We want to be able to relax and constrict and do it in a rhythmic fashion that allows for flow of blood or food or whatever we're trying to move through the body. And that rhythm is what we're trying to regulate. And when it sounds to me like when the eNOS and the nNOS in particular, those two enzymes become or incapable of producing NO at a great rate, that enables the blood flow to be decreased in its functionality. And that will then result in more of the cardiovascular style conditions that we're hearing. The other side of this is iNOS, inducible nitric oxide synthase, which is very much an inflammatory immune type of nitric oxide, it functions in a different style than eNOS and nNOS. So eNOS and nNOS are supposed to produce low to moderate levels of NO in a rhythmic and slow and long-term fashion, where iNOS is massive amounts of NO in very, very short periods of time in burst capacity to try to enable a ton of blood flow to enter a certain area because it's triggered by inflammatory or immune-based reaction. So I just wanted to say that in my research, I'm aware that there's two sides to this coin, that not all nitric oxide synthase is negative. Not all of it is necessarily positive either. It's just not always going towards a crazy inflammatory reaction. So when we then produce or we support the dietary nitrate pathway and work to ideally regulate and down-regulate that iNOS, the inducible nitric oxide synthase activation, you mentioned that there is a regulatory or kind of an attenuating effect on the iNOS reaction. Can you dive into a little bit of that research to talk about how the dietary nitrates attenuate the iNOS? Is there anything in there that's kind of biochemically known or something that we can share there?
Yeah, there is. And you mentioned sort of the necessity of vascular toning. We need that responsiveness. We need that pulsing, like you said. We need to stop thinking that all inflammation is bad, because inflammation is a necessary response for the body to have a reaction to calm the inflammation, bring in the anti-inflammatory measures. But that response between constriction and dilation and that toning of the vascular tissue really relies on healthy endothelial tissue lining your blood vessels. And what we see in the research on dietary nitrates from food sources, from supplement sources, sodium nitrite, potassium nitrite, all of them help build resilience and repair the integrity of the endothelial tissue. Now the enzymes, the eNOS enzymes in the endothelial tissue can be more responsive. They start to recouple. They start to perform better. So we can see how the dietary nitrates on a regular basis, because we don't accommodate to them. We do not develop tolerance to nitrates. We have to keep consuming them dietarily. That consistent level helps bring some resiliency and integrity back to the endothelial tissue. Now we see eNOS working a little bit more appropriately. And now maybe the individual, though not accommodating to dietary nitrates, doesn't have to worry about getting 27 cups worth of spinach equivalent of nitrates a day. Maybe they can start to reduce that load, eat a more normal portion of dietary nitrates, again, food or supplement. And we start to see the eNOS system work more appropriately. The other thing we know about that vascular integrity is that nitric oxide is important to preventing platelet aggregation. So we start to reduce risk of blood clotting when we have that endothelial tissue more functional, allowing eNOS to do its work and produce nitric oxide as needed, while also supporting with dietary nitrates.
So when you talk about dietary nitrates, I just want to clarify. Obviously, spinach and other green leafy vegetables and vegetables in general provide organic sources of nitrogen that can be broken down, as you said, through the digestive process and given to cells so that they have the raw material available. But there's a lot of talk about processed meats that have nitrates and nitrites in them as preservatives or flavor enhancers or otherwise. Do they have an equivalent potential value? Because people often talk about those as being sort of a negative aspect of processed foods. But is it a negative, or is it something that people should have less fear of ingesting?
I think if you are eating your leafy green vegetables, if you are doing your breath work, if you are sleeping well and paying attention to your sleep hygiene, you're moving your body, the occasional charcuterie board is not going to kill you. If meat-based products are part of your diet. And of course, we want quality, and we don't want low-quality preservative-fed nitrites. But I want to make a small correction to the nomenclature, that the dietary nitrates that we eat are actually inorganic. Inorganic from a biochemical term, meaning they don't contain carbon. The organic nitrates that are nitroglycerin, they are a carbon-based molecule. So that's the distinction there. And so a lot of that fear of nitrites and fear of salami and fear of pepperoni, for lack of a better word, is based on two things: research on poor quality foods and poor quality processed foods. And trust me, I don't want anybody to be ingesting processed foods, but there are labels in our diet that in the modern world are harder to get around. So we want people to make a good decision on quality. We want to make sure they're eating a complement of those inorganic nitrates from vegetable sources. There are some nitrates in eggs, in grass-fed meats, in fish. They're at a much reduced concentration compared to the leafy green vegetables. I happen to love leafy green vegetables. I was raised by a master gardener. I don't understand why people don't eat them. But really, I think that research has now been debunked a little bit, and that we shouldn't have a fear of it, but we should recognize that those are foods that they're concentrated. They're also concentrated in a protein-rich food without sufficient antioxidants to protect the nitrates from amination and now creating more inflammatory nitrogen-based molecules. So if you're eating charcuterie, please eat a salad and chew it really well and provide the antioxidant values so that those more potentially inflammatory foods do not become problematic for you.
So get the prosciutto with the melon.
Yeah.
So
and chew it really well. This is the thing. I am on a big mission in the world. Anybody who's ever studied under me knows that the first part of digestion is you got to actually chew your food. And this is the way we're going to get the most benefit out of all the beautiful nutrients in our food. And the same thing goes for our nitrate foods. It's very important that we give our body and our digestive system and our enterosalivary nitrate recycling system an opportunity to work on the molecule as it's intended. And when we don't chew our food, it's now bound to a protein in food that your chances of reducing it well are decreased.
I think this is a point that can't be understated. Like, it's so important, and one of those huge missing pieces. You need to chew your food way more than you probably are. I was out to dinner with we were out for a bunch of friends. We're all out for a friend's 40th birthday party, and we're all eating our meals, and this is kind of mid golf round. It was a lot of fun. And one of the guys, there was 10 of us, and one guy had finished his entire plate while everybody else was maybe halfway through their plate. And it was just one of those instances where I said, my goodness, there's no way he chewed his food well enough. And this is, I think, such an important piece to the puzzle. We don't have teeth anywhere other than our mouth, right? The only place where physical food breakdown can take place is in the mouth. We don't have teeth in our nose, which is why we breathe through our nose and we chew with our mouth. And that's an important thing to remember. It's very simple, but it's definitely something that we overlook. When we chew that food really well and we break it down, we're also providing saliva and salivary amylase to break down that food in a far more effective manner. Little tip that I have for people is take a bite, use your fork, use your spoon, whatever you're eating, take a bite and put your fork down. Don't have the next bite ready to shovel in your mouth as soon as that first bite is done. Put the fork down, wait a second, give yourself a moment, chew that food really well, because when you do that, you're physically breaking down that food more effectively. You're getting it into a form that your stomach can handle far more easily. It's going to allow for more nutrients to be broken down, be absorbed into your intestines far more effectively, and those nutrients to then be dispersed. So there's a big difference between two people that are eating the exact same meal and one scarfing it down and the other person taking their time. How much of those nutrients actually end up in that person's cells to produce and support health overall. Don't forget to chew. And the second thing just here on really quickly is, you mentioned the oral microbiome when it comes to this as well. And the oral microbiome is where some of these major conversions of nitrate to nitric oxide do occur. And I think that's an important point here as well. When you chew your food effectively and you're chewing whole foods that are minimally preserved, minimally broken down, and you're actually giving the oral microbiome an opportunity to convert nitrate to nitric oxide. I think that's an important point as well. Sorry, JP, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't want to leave people with the impression that if you wolf your food down, that somehow you're not going to gain as many calories so that you get to eat more calories. Yeah, it's actually the reverse. If you spend the time to chew your food, you will actually spend more time eating, but ingest less food. And it will give your nervous system, because remember, your nervous system is monitoring what's going on in your stomach. It's carrying information back up along that all-important vagus nerve up into your brain center. And in your brainstem, it's determining whether or not you should still feel hungry. And if you don't give your body enough time to send that message up and your brain enough time to extract the proper signal, you won't feel the satiety necessary. So people who wolf their foods down, I talk to people who are overweight, and you talk with them and they're absolutely wolfing their food down. And they'll say, I have no satiety impulse. I only have hunger and distension pain. There's nothing in between. I'm starving or I'm eating so much that it hurts. And so it's just a function of the fact that you eat too fast. If you chew your food, you spend more time, you will find that hunger is satisfied, but you're not in pain. And you've eaten fewer calories, and it'll give you a chance to, moderate your diet a little bit. I wanted to circle back on another point, though, which is that, amino acids, for example, are organic nitrogen compounds. When the body is starved of the sources of nitrogen that it needs to make nitric oxide, do you actually end up breaking down protein? And will you end up using nitrogen from amino acids in order to create nitric oxide?
Absolutely. Our body is designed to carry stores of energy, carry stores of rebuilding, scaffolding raw ingredients, if you will. So absolutely, our body over time and with starvation, if you will, of those proteins, it'll start breaking down proteins to free up amino acids for that function, for fueling the detoxification pathways in the liver, for generating proteins that are involved in immune responses. So absolutely, this would be, I don't want to try this experiment. I love food too much, but this is what we see in muscle wasting. We see that blood flow needs to keep happening, even if this person is starved of nutrition. So we have to have a way to do that. So we do break down proteins to replenish some tissues while others are going through apoptosis and immunosenescence. And we absolutely do break those proteins down to make nitric oxide to keep the blood flowing, to keep blood pressure regulated, to keep heart rate regulated. Absolutely. I don't have any scientific studies to quantify that, but absolutely that would be happening. So those of us in the modern world who are, fortunate and blessed with quality foods, we want to make those great choices every day. I want to come back to let's bring blood flow back to chewing and the enterosalivary pathway. So I'm going to sit down today at lunch and I'm going to have a leafy green salad with arugula and kale and spinach and probably a protein on it. I make my own salad dressing, so it's going to have, something I know what's in it. And I'm going to enjoy that free of distraction. I'm not going to be multitasking for work. I'm probably going to sit out in the sunshine while I enjoy it. I'm going to thoroughly chew my food. And as Dr. Habib said, we have a resident community of oral microbes. There are at least 8 different genera with dozens of species within each genre of nitrate-reducing bacteria in the mouth. Let's talk about how we recycle those nitrates. So we're eating our salad. We chew. We break those nitrates away from the protein. Now the molecule is a little bit easier to identify in the body and to be acted upon. We swallow. We have stomach acid and enzymes that help us break down nitrates into nitrite that get pulled into the bloodstream. Some of that nitrite is converted to nitric oxide in the upper gastrointestinal system to help with stimulation of hunger and satiety hormones, to help stimulate gastric motility, to help that migratory motor complex move nutrients along the small intestine. So right there in the digestive system, we have this need for nitric oxide. What doesn't get utilized in that moment is assimilated into the bloodstream. Nitrates have a half-life of about 8 hours. Their reduction to nitrites have a half-life of about 45 minutes, and nitric oxide of about 2 to 3 milliseconds. So nitrate and nitrite is circulating in the serum. We excrete, this is why we don't build tolerance. We excrete about 60% of what we don't need through the urine via the kidneys. And about 25% is recycled back to specific cells within the salivary glands. Here comes the role of the oral microbiome. As we salivate all day long, we are excreting nitrate-rich saliva into the mouth. The nitrate-reducing bacterial species have their own nitrate reductases. They have their own enzymes that help us break down nitrate, salivary nitrate, to nitrite. And we swallow, and we start the entire recycling process again. To me, as a physiology buff, this is like one of the most amazing natural intelligent things our body is designed to do. So it gets us back to that importance of chewing, but now we're building up a resiliency. We're building resilient endothelial tissue. We're building sustainable levels of nitric oxide that keep blood flowing. That blood flow contributes to the distribution of those hunger and satiety hormones, as well as the distribution of all of our hormones in the bloodstream. It contributes to that gastric motility piece so that we are optimizing our digestive flow and our nutrient assimilation, and on and on and on, all the things that blood flow does for us. Oxygen delivery to all of our cells with mitochondria so that there's sufficient oxygen to feed the electron transport chain and make the ATP that is our energy. There's evidence that we use nitric oxide to regulate our sleep-wake cycle and our thermoregulatory cycle. So this is starting to be very important for women of a certain age in perimenopausal and menopausal transition. Those 2 key features right there are really important to symptom reduction, but also just to keeping blood flow going and keeping that delivery and distribution of the molecules the body needs and makes and utilizes to keep us healthy and functioning.
There's a very important timeline that you mentioned there, which is that perimenopausal, menopausal timeline, which is also when a lot of cardiovascular conditions peak for the females of that age, right? We are dealing with a decrease in blood flow. We're dealing with hormonal changes that are pretty significant that JP and I will never understand the underlying effects of. We'll see it on our wives, of course, at some point. But right now, it's not something that we are aware of. And so when it comes to that population, what are some of the positive effects of nitric oxide supplementation in supporting those perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms?
Yeah, this is a really key point. I'm so glad we brought this into the conversation because this is the education that Berkeley Life's trying to get out for women, especially, and for the men who love women, and for, the families who love women. Nitric oxide eNOS enzymes function in women. They function best near activated estrogen receptor sites. This is what's in the literature. As estrogen declines, we start to see a dramatic drop in nitric oxide production through the endothelial tissue in women. And the women seem to hold their capacity to make nitric oxide a little bit longer, like into what I would call the prime reproductive years. And then as the estrogen decline begins, there's not enough activated estrogen receptor sites. eNOS becomes uncoupled, less nitric oxide, less vasodilation, less, regularity and regulation of that toning mechanism. And this is where we start to see the direct correlation to increased cardiovascular risk in women. And, it's a silent killer. So it's very important that we talk about this.
And we've talked about before in a couple of episodes where we've talked about menopausal symptoms. We talk about when that estrogen withdrawal happens, there's also an increase in inflammation. And that inflammation signaling is a big cause of vasovagal responses, things like the hot flashes and the night sweats and things like that. And that goes to the thermoregulating aspects of nitric oxide in the central nervous system. I'm very interested also in sleep and the sleep dynamics. And when you were talking about sort of the pulsatile aspects of nitric oxide in the digestive tract, I'm thinking also about during slow wave sleep, the glymphatic clearance that is required in order to, prevent neurotoxic buildup of metabolic waste, et cetera. I'm familiar with aquaporin 4 moving fluid out of the blood vessels and out of the lymphatic or glymphatic system, which is really just the cerebral spinal fluid that's pulled out of the bloodstream. But then it needs to get pumped, literally pumped through the interstitial space in order to wash away the metabolic waste that we're trying to get rid of. How does nitric oxide play a role in that movement of that cerebral spinal fluid through the interstitial space? Because I would imagine, because there is a pumping process, and I think it comes directly from the vasculature. But what's your experience or your knowledge if people have looked into nitric oxide in that capacity?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that nitric oxide is responsible for angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels. So taking blood vessels that are compromised, merging them, opening a new flow. The same thing is true of the lymphatic vessels. Nitric oxide plays a direct role in signaling lymphangiogenesis. This is the creation of new lymphatic vessels. So without knowing the research, my knowledge is guiding me to how's that fluid getting through that interstitial space. It's through that formation of new lymphatic vessels. And then, yes, it does require a toned vascular system and the regular contractile nature of the heart and pumping the blood through the blood vessels. So I think there again, we want nitric oxide to keep endothelial tissue of high integrity so that nitric oxide is still produced to maintain that toned blood flow response. At the same time, it's helping create new avenues of escape, if you will, for those toxic elements to be metabolized and excreted from the body.
One of the other areas that I've seen that supports this is the skeletal muscle pump, right? We know that skeletal muscle, when we move, when we step, when we lift weights, when we exercise, we're actually pumping physically allowing for the pushing of the interstitial fluid back into the lymphatic vessels and allowing for that fluid to enter back into the bloodstream and be cleared out and whatnot. So there is a skeletal muscle movement exercise based component to this. And one of the other areas that I use with a lot of my clients and for myself, nitric oxide support in a supplemental fashion is post exercise, in the post exercise recovery timeline. And that's a really important thing. When we exercise, the idea is that we're pushing ourselves hormetically in a very positive way into a sympathetic state, right? Slightly more exertional, slightly more, not necessarily fight or flight, but we're going in that direction for sure. And then we want to be able to pull back post exercise into that recovery based, parasympathetic, vaguely toning, rest, digest, and recover phase. And that's a big tool that I use, that nitric oxide support. And it's been shown in the literature to have a very positive effect to enable that shift to parasympathetic tone. Do you know any research or have you had any experience like seeing that shift and enabling that recovery process post exercise?
I haven't worked with any patients who are using, like a combination of exercise, but also a vagus nerve stimulator, a device, if you will. So I don't have any data on that. But as you were talking, I was thinking about, yes, the interrelationship between nitric oxide signaling of the vagus nerve and the vagus nerve signaling of NO when needed to push that lymphatic pump, to help us remove lactate stores from muscles that have been overexercised, to help us remove amino acids that have been, wasted, if you will, from proteins during your muscle use. So I would love to see some research, and maybe you could point me to this on that. We know about the recovery effects of nitric oxide for that waste removal, and also from just bringing enhanced blood flow to spent muscles, bringing more oxygenation, reigniting mitochondria, building up stores of musculoskeletal energy. I'd love to see some research on using a vagal toning device in and around exercise and measuring nitric oxide levels at the same time. It'd be really fascinating to see that.
Yeah, I've come across a bit showing that vagus nerve stim does increase nitric oxide production through the eNOS and nNOS, particularly the nNOS pathway in the heart. That was the research study that I've seen. And then I've also seen research studies where nitrate supplementation specifically has been shown to increase HRV, meaning that vagal tone has been elevated, right? So there is a very clear relationship between nitric oxide productivity through a nitrate pathway and vagal tone. I think that's a huge piece. And the key thing here is, can you enable that resilience that the body is seeking, right? The resilience of taking on a stressor, experiencing that stressor, but being able to bounce back from it. And that's really what I think the ultimate experience of life is can you handle a stressor and bounce back from it post that stress being relieved or whatnot?
I think an even simpler study might really be an entry point into looking at this, which would just be, what is the stability when you measure, we're using the salivary sticks, what is the stability of a measurement over a period of time? And then look to see whether or not a vagus nerve stimulation treatment will alter that measurement within some period of time that you would designate as only happening as a result of the intervention, and then show that there's a change. And then you can later on, okay, well, let's do that in the aftermath after exercise or after some stress event. Might be a relatively straightforward thing to do. And it would be, I think, kind of an exciting outcome.
Yeah, I would love that. These test strips, it's a 10-second test. And what I try to encourage people to do is to test multiple times a day to recognize their patterns of depletion or potential depletion. So you could certainly, it's pre-exercise. You're going to test. You're showing low in salivary nitrate. Okay, I want better energy, better mitochondrial function for my activity. I need to plan ahead. I need to ingest dietary nitrates 60, 90 minutes ahead of my activity based on how my digestive system functions. Am I a slow metabolizer, a fast metabolizer? How is my vagus nerve kicking in to bring me in a parasympathetic state to improve all that? Then we test after dosing the nitrates. 90 minutes or so is what we recommend. Do your physical activity, test afterwards. How much have you depleted in the need to make more ATP, in the need to bring more blood flow to muscles? I'm thinking about it in my days as a former competitive athlete. Now I'm just a yogi. But, I was always amazed at the athletes who could compete and then immediately go chow down a big hamburger or something like that. My nervous system was like, no way. I need about 3 hours to bring this body down where any of that is going to function. So by testing those patterns of depletion and sufficiency, our nitric oxide levels just from taking a spinach salad or one dose of nitric oxide support is not going to maintain consistency. It's not a one-time test. It's a tool to help us hack into where and when we need to boost. And I think for each of us, it's an individual basis to based on your metabolic function, your heart rate variability, your ability to drop into that parasympathetic tone that we need, and your digestive function. It's all inclusive. So yeah, let's do that study and we can start on ourselves.
One of my favorite things about this particular product that we're talking about today, which is the nitric oxide foundations product and kind of the Berkeley Life idea of utilizing the test strips to know where you are, is there aren't a lot of supplements out there that have a testing capability to tell you whether you need it right now or not. And I think that's awesome because so many people out there are taking supplements without knowing whether they truly need it. Whether you need those B vitamins. Most people do, but maybe you're getting enough through your diet. But what if how could one person possibly know what their body is currently experiencing? What are the things that are happening within your body that then dictate, I need these particular nutrients to be entering at this time? And so when you do a test strip, and I'm lucky enough to have mine out here, and it's not so bad. I think I'm in near the threshold with my timeline. You're in a good spot there. I love that. I know when I'm in threshold that I'm not too worried about needing my dose right now. But if I'm going to be exercising, I did this morning already, but if I'm going to be exercising in a little bit, I can dose up now and make sure that I have enough later to enable that recovery. I think that's probably my favorite piece to this puzzle is I know where I stand simply in a 10-second test strip kind of tool that's available readily for me. Talk a little bit about the test strips, because I think this is a key thing that a lot of people are unaware of that Berkeley Life actually introduced to the market, I believe.
Yeah, this is actually how I first learned about Berkeley Life at a nutrition conference many, many years ago. There was a test strip and there was an advice to go eat beetroot product and nothing else. And these test strips are pretty phenomenal to me because they are a little bit of a biohacking tool, which a lot of my patients like. But they are tapping into that enterosalivary nitrate reduction pathway that I talked about. So the idea is we have those commensal bacteria that help us reduce nitrate to nitrite. Then we swallow it. So we just simply put a test strip in a pool of saliva on the back of the tongue for about 5 seconds. Bring it out, saturate the other side, which is where we're just testing a Grice reaction. And I did take my nitrates this morning, and you'll see that I'm quite pink. I'm really in the target zone there. That's where I want to be for my day, to give me energy to get through my day, for the focus. Then we use this as, let's say I test low. Okay, I take a 2 capsule dose of dietary nitrates and cofactor nutrients. I ingest them. I allow that upper gastrointestinal function. I forgot to mention as part of this pathway, we also have intestinal microbes that are nitrate reducing as well. They also have nitrate reductases that help us break down captured nitrates in the intestine to pull some more into the bloodstream and improve our blood flow. If I don't test well, I'm going to take a dose. 90 minutes later, I should have ingested and assimilated some of those nitrates, so much so that I have a new store of nitrates in the saliva that now turn my test strip a little more pink. Maybe I don't make it to the target zone right away, but maybe I get closer. So now I know with daily ingestion, and also, Dr. Habib told me I should do some other things to boost my nitric oxide. I should practice nasal breathing, do my 4-7-8 breath today, and tone my vagus nerve, which I know is contributing to NO production. I should get some moderate exercise. I should go to bed tonight and not be on my screen and doom scrolling, things like that. I find that these test strips are very helpful in making patients be more compliant and sticking to their holistic protocol. If we don't see conversion, meaning they test low, they take a dose, and there's absolutely no change on the test strip, now we start to question the quality, the integrity, the diversity of the oral microbiome. Do I need to send my patient out for an analysis? Probably not. I just need to provide some prebiotic dietary nitrates because they are prebiotic for those bacterial species. So I encourage my patient to really chew their food and really chew their leafy green vegetables and to enjoy some other nitrate foods like celery and rhubarb and things like that. But Berkeley Life also developed a prebiotic nitrate chewing gum. And the chewing gum I was not a gum fan until I ran into this. I played competitive fast pitch softball most of my younger days. I chewed a lot of bad bubble gum. So I had given up gum many years ago. This one is a concentrated dietary nitrate formula that in a gum base that is specifically studied in dentistry to reduce the acid promoting pathogenic bacteria in the mouth while feeding the dietary nitrate beneficial one. So one piece of gum chewed, comes in a little blister pack, chewed 5 minutes twice a day in between meals is allowing that extended hang time. You're chewing the gum for about 5 minutes. Dietary nitrates are bathing those oral microbes that want to eat the nitrates and reduce them for us. And my experience clinically is that within 1 to 2 weeks of somebody chewing gum twice a day, now when they take their dose of dietary nitrates, now they're registering on the scale and we see the progression. We also see it symptom-wise. We see that they're better converting. So energy is going up. Sleep is improving. Blood pressure might be starting to come down, things like that.
Absolutely.
The test strips to me are a no-brainer. It takes 10 seconds. It's active for the patient. It gets them engaged in the process and it sort of reinforces the education I've been giving them about that whole, look, you're meant to recycle these things. Let's help the body do so.
If I could just jump in on the oral microbiome piece, I think this is a really important one as well. People don't realize that the use of mouthwash, specifically alcohol-based mouthwashes, kills off not only the bad bacteria that may be causing a halitosis type of issue that you're trying to get rid of, but it actually kills off the good nitrogen converting or nitrate converting oral microbes as well. And so the use of these, Listerine and Scope and all these brands that are out there that is just kind of happening on its own is actually killing off your internal capacity or your oral microbe capacity to convert nitrate to nitric oxide. So huge piece of the puzzle.
Not much. It's alcohol in general does that.
Period. Yes.
If you're drinking hard alcohol, you're wiping out whole colonies of bacteria. But I want to switch back to one thing we talked about, maybe offline. I can't remember. When red light therapy, one of the benefits of red light therapy is to dislodge nitric oxide from cytochrome C oxidase in your mitochondria. It supports good energy. It supports good mitochondrial health, red light therapy, because it's dislodging the NO that can clog up that enzyme. So NO doesn't last very long. As you said, it lasts for milliseconds. So I would assume that it's part of the recycling process, getting good red light, getting good full spectrum light to dislodge that NO and then recycle it. I'm assuming that that's not a negative about NO. It's really just helping to put that NO in the right place and get your nitrogen back into circulation where it should be.
Absolutely. Berkeley Life just did a blog about a month and a half ago about the combined benefits of dietary nitrate supplementation with red light therapy. And so we're a firm believer in that exchange. Yes, we do need to dislodge that inappropriately placed molecule, but we also need to make sure there's sufficient antioxidants in the diet and in formula, if you will, so that nitrosylation doesn't happen, so that released NO doesn't then attach to an inappropriate molecule and become inflammatory. So it's the combination of providing the substrate to make nitric oxide through the oxidative reductive processes and allowing enough electrons to be in the area from antioxidants to manage that release so that it doesn't become more inflammatory. And the evidence is really great that about red light therapy. I used red light therapy on myself, recovering from a sinus surgery many years ago. And my device at the time was maybe one of the newer or earlier ones and slightly archaic, but I swore by it, even though I looked like I was holding like a 1990s cell phone on my face all day. But I swore by how quickly I recovered. And I was using Berkeley Life dietary nitrates at the same time too.
That's
as
great.
well as some other therapies, but yeah.
So one last question I have around the enzymes that help to generate the nitric oxide synthase. Those tend to slow down or decrease in expression as we age. And that's a function likely of epigenetic changes that occur with various different challenges, inflammatory experiences, et cetera. Is there anything that you would suggest or anything that we can do other than supplementation to sort of help to restore the production of those eNOS and iNOS enzymes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, we live in an increasingly toxic world. I think we all know that. I don't want to say extreme. That just sounds like there's no hope. I do believe there's hope. I believe that individuals really need to practice detoxing, not just their body, but their lifestyle. And this is something I really took to heart when I myself was recovering from mold toxicity and, trying to restore health to my body. It's everything from clean air, clean water, clean food, paying attention to organics so that we are first not overloading the exposome with too many toxins and not being able to rid ourselves of them. It's breath work. I practice daily mindful breath work. We know that nostril breathing activates the paranasal sinuses here. And this is a big place where the endothelial tissue kicks out a bunch of nitric oxide. So we really want to practice breath work. We want to get regular. Oh, go ahead, Dr.
On that point, I just want to mention that there was a really great study showing that nasal resonance breathing increased NO output by 15 times, not 15%, 15x higher just by humming through the nose, like literally going with your nasal cavities open and mouth closed and humming through your nose. What that did was it activated that eNOS activation at the nasal sinuses and 15x NO output. So just a huge number there for that.
Yeah, that's great statistics. And it makes the case for, really committing to your Om in yoga practice and humming, singing, gargling has been well studied, things like that. So introducing those things into the lifestyle. Exercise, but not excessive exercise, because what is excessive exercise? But it's creating oxidative stress. So anything we can do to eliminate oxidative stress, breath work, exercise, clean house, clean body, clean food, clean body products, avoidance of typical common oxidative stressors. JP mentioned excessive alcohol, sugar consumption, the smokers and the vapors. We just need you to stop right now. You're really impairing your endothelial function and setting yourself up for conditions you don't want to experience. What else could I add? Just movement in general. I heard a term the other day that I wrote down, listening to another presenter, kinetic flow. Kinetic flow is so important to not just our blood flow, but also to the postural and the biomechanics of our opposing muscles. You'll notice that I'm standing. I keep moving a little bit because I have to move my body. Getting off our butts and getting up and moving on a regular stand, sit, lift, reach, pull, all the things that we were sort of designed to do that are outside the gym routine and outside the competitive cycling or whatever your jam is. We have all these great tools, but getting back to the basics of movement, I think is very important.
I hate talking about blood flow without talking about hydration because I think they definitely go hand in hand. On the hydration side, do you have any recommendations, any particular tips that you talk to people about in your practice?
I talk about sipping, not chugging. I talk about being in just as mindful of a state when you're sipping water as when you're eating, because we do want that perfect exchange of oxygen and hydrogen through the body. I talk to my patients about the fact that if they're thirsty, they're probably already dehydrated, and we need to, think about hydration at a cellular level. And what that involves is electrolyte minerals. So I am a big fan of electrolyte supplementation. We start with some patients, we start real simply with a pinch of quality salt and a big squeeze of lemon or lime, because there are electrolyte minerals in there, but then we can work up to several of the other, there's widely available amazing products on the market too. And I start every day with an electrolyte water myself.
I love it.
Yeah,
I live in a arid climate, and so I find that hydration is a little bit more difficult than when I lived in a humid climate. So I have to really be mindful of that, especially if I'm going to exercise outdoors today.
Yeah, and keep in mind that I think it's really important that people recognize that when you're dehydrated, that is a potent activator of your sympathetic nervous system in a way that if you're chronically dehydrated, then you are chronically sympathetically activated. And we've talked about that your immune system responds to that as a threat. And you're going to end up in a chronically inflamed state that's going to deplete not just your nitric oxide. It's going to be damaging to your tissue. It's going to be, in the long run, it's devastating to your mitochondria. It's going to throw off your sleep schedule. Once that wheel comes off, all the rest of the wheels come off as well. So I couldn't agree more that hydration has to be a priority.
It has to be. And I want to add to that if you are, let's just say a middle life adult and you find yourself grasping your back, or, you bend down to pick up the bag and your back hurts, you might want to think about your hydration first. Your kidneys might be screaming with inflammation and generating back pain that isn't actually sourced at the back. It's sourced from the organ, and we want to make sure we avoid that.
It's even funny you bring that up, because as a chiropractor, like tight muscles and people dealing with, the back pains and whatnot, one of those big pieces to the puzzle. We often think, muscles meaning physical stress. Somebody had either put out like subluxated or put out a bone in their spine, or something has happened on the physical side, a muscle strain of some form. But hydration plays a huge role in muscle function. And so making sure that you're hydrated well enough that you don't get these sore muscles, right? Like, you should be hydrating when you're working out. You should be hydrating effectively when you're not working out or doing those things. So hydration is a big component of what we often consider just physical stress. Make sure that you're getting the nutrients in and that hydration in to ensure that your muscles can flow effectively and work the way you want them to. So I think that can't be a missing piece there. You got to make sure that that's looked at for sure.
Absolutely. 60 to 65% of our body is water.
Yeah.
So we really need to just keep it that simple and replenish it.
Keep it closer to the 65.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
This has been absolutely wonderful. Great conversation. Lots of great, important insights and inputs that people can practically apply today. Like, this is, I think, really helpful for anybody who's looking at understanding what's going on in their own health, trying to identify their need for nitric oxide. If nitric oxide support is something that your body needs, the test strips can help provide that input. If you're somebody who's chronically used mouthwash for many, many years and you didn't realize that it was having a negative effect, or the alcohol that you were taking in was having that negative effect, then tools like the prebiotic gum, the balanced gum from Berkeley Life, can be very effective in helping to replenish that bacterial population and supporting long-term nitric oxide capacity. And then providing that foundation tool that Berkeley has put together, I think, is a huge, phenomenal tool that I've used with my patients. I know, Cathy, you're using it effectively with yours. And JP, I know it's sitting on your kitchen counter right now. So these are great tools that are available to support blood flow for a lot of people. JP, any final questions, any final thoughts on your side?
Yeah, just one. We talked a little bit about the fact that when you use red light therapy, or you're doing things to dislodge that nitric oxide, and reintroduce it into the cycle, so it's not cluttering up the cytochrome C oxidase, that there's the risk that can lead to oxidative stress and damage from reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species. So you want to have antioxidants. I'm a big fan of making certain that you're using the right types of antioxidants for the location where that oxidative risk is occurring, and that's inside the mitochondria in this case. So we want to upregulate superoxide dismutase. We want to upregulate catalase. We want to upregulate glutathione, and most importantly, my favorite, it may not be the most important one, but melatonin. Are there products or things that Berkeley Life has to meet that antioxidant need that we've now identified?
Well, because we are so dedicated to the education that we are so foundational, we don't have an independent antioxidant formula. However, we do have a clinically tested and clinically validated concentration of vitamin C in formula specifically to be that protective agent against reactive nitrogen species, reactive oxygen species. I would also say that the thing about Berkeley Life Nitric Oxide Foundation is when an individual starts taking it, they start to feel things very quickly. The two things I hear the most is it possible I have better energy after just one dose? It is possible. Not everybody's going to feel it with one dose, but very quickly, within 1 to 2 weeks, people feel improved energy. They feel less cold hands and feet because their peripheral circulation is better. And then clinically, the thing I've noticed is that in addition to staying more compliant, because they got the test strips that tells them, and they're compliant with all the other factors of the diet and the lifestyle things I've taught them. The other thing that I'm watching happen, and I've talked to lots of practitioners about this, is a reduced supplement stack overall. When you improve blood flow and you increase oxygenation and nutrient delivery to all the tissues of the body, there is less need for additional elements on top of that. Specifically, Dr. Habib mentioned the stress response. I'm seeing less need for adrenal adaptogenic support in my patients because their blood flow is opened up and the nervous system is getting the oxygen and the nutrients that they need. From that mitochondrial standpoint, we know that nitric oxide stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So I think that's part of the energy piece. So as degenerated mitochondria are fusing and merging and making a new healthy one, there's better release of nitric oxide. There's better release, better production of ATP and release of oxygen, and less need for some of those other things. I am also a big fan of glutathione. I am a big fan of melatonin in certain individuals. But again, from my experience, it depends on the person's autonomic nervous system and also whether they're really changing their sleep habits or not. So I think that beyond having the antioxidants in formula, what we offer is improved blood flow that makes everything else in the body work a little bit more effectively.
More effective clearance of toxic burden from air, wherever the cellular buildup is occurring, you can get it out more effectively and get in what you need more effectively. I think that's so huge. You and I are practitioners. We've both seen the people that come in with, the garbage bag full of supplements, and you're like, if this stack is not working for you, clearly it's likely a blood flow related issue, or you're just not absorbing these nutrients and getting them where they need to go. And I hate when I see the garbage bag or the massive list of supplements, because supplements are supplemental. They are not meant to be the primary driver of nutrient sources, right? We're supposed to get it from our food, and we're supposed to get it around in our body effectively. And if that's not happening, then likely the issue is blood flow is not as effective as you want it to be. And this can be a great way to reduce that supplement stack, reduce that monthly supplement budget that you've created for that garbage bag full of supplements. Cathy, this has been just wonderful. And I want to thank you for coming on. Any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up our session with you today?
Just that please reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer questions as the Chief Science Officer. That's sort of my role. Practitioner or patient alike, you can reach out to me at info@berkeleylife.com. You will get a discount linked to Dr. Habib today in the show notes. So, please take advantage. We have a great starter kit for you that comes with a month's supply of nitric oxide foundation and a tube of test strips, 50 of them. So you can get started checking yourself there. And if I could ask one more thing, get outside, get your feet in the grass, take some nice deep nostril breaths today. And wherever you are, and nature is also going to boost nitric oxide, and we could do a whole nother episode about that.
We absolutely could. And this is a thing that we talk about all the time. Get outside, let that sun hit you in the face. We've spent enough time staring at this screen, getting this wonderful episode out for you. I'm going to go head out into the sun after this as well. Thank you all for listening. You can find out more about Berkeley Life products at berkeleylife.com. Check out the link in the show notes. Check out the link that I mentioned in the ad earlier, and we'll make sure that everybody can get their blood flow upgraded. Please share this episode with one person who you think could utilize this information, somebody who's suffering from a case of too many supplements in a garbage bag, or a case of autoimmune disease that's just not getting better, get this episode to them, because this could help them truly change their life and upgrade their overall health. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next one.
Thank you both.